Welcome to episode 6 of the Heat Check podcast. As always, Andrew White here with my co-host, Matt Truty. We got a good one coming up for you guys. Today we're going to be talking about the Eastern Conference specifically, kind of what lies ahead for them. It's been an interesting offseason. You know, a lot of teams took a step forward. Most of them took a step back. So this should be a pretty interesting podcast here. We each have 4 questions that we have not shared with the other person. So this is all kind of ad-lib off the top of our heads. So without any further ado, Matt, you got your first question for me?
Yeah, we're each going to give, obviously, each other 4 questions about the Eastern Conference. And with my first one, just a quick basic one, who is your dark horse heading on into the 2017-2018 season? Obviously we know the front runners in Boston and Cleveland, and those two teams are, primed to really make a run to the finals. But who's a team that, most people may not expect to make a run and that will, or that could?
So my answer can go one of 2 ways. I think there's 2 teams that when you really think about who are not really expected to make a deep run, but certainly could if given, the right situation and the right tools. Last year, we talked about the Toronto Raptors, but I really feel like they kind of took a step back this offseason. They shelled out a lot of money to keep their big 3 together. They lost some key guys like PJ Tucker. They lost a starter in DeMarre Carroll. And I just really don't feel like they improved that much in relation to, obviously Boston, and even
they also lost Corey Joseph.
Yeah, they did, and Corey's one of the best backup point guards in the league, so that hurts their depth. I don't know if they're just going to be able to sustain a deep playoff run like they have these last few years. That being said, I really feel like a dark horse contender is going to be the Washington Wizards. John Wall is getting better every year, and I think if he can make that jump to pretty much an MVP candidate. He was kind of on the fringe last year. If he can really make that jump into the MVP discussion, obviously they just shelled out a lot of money to Otto Porter, and they didn't really get to sign any new big-name free agents. But Scott Brooks is an underrated coach. He took OKC to the finals, several Western Conference appearances, got the Wizards to the second round last year. And as long as John Wall continues to improve, and the same goes for Otto Porter, I don't see why this is a team that can't make a run to the Eastern Conference Finals and maybe even possibly the finals. They took Boston to 7 games last year. That was a really tight series, and so they're definitely a contender in my eyes. I think that it's going to take a lot for them to overcome Cleveland and Boston, but if any team out there is going to do it, it's going to be the Wizards. Another dark horse contender for me is going to be the Miami Heat. The second half of last season, the last 41 games, they went 30-11, which is on pace to be a 60-win team over the course of a full season, which would have placed them first in the Eastern Conference by about a mile. And they added some solid guys, guys like Kelly Olynyk, not necessarily stars per se, but guys that can come in and give you valuable minutes in the playoffs. Obviously, Kelly had that big game in Game 7 against the Wizards that I just talked about. Scoring a career high, I believe, in that game. And really just kind of being an X factor. So what he brings to the table can really help Miami. I think they're primed to nab at least the 5th seed, maybe the 6th seed in an East that's gotten pretty weak. So if there was an injury to maybe Cleveland or Boston, I could definitely see Miami, making a little run there. Eric Spoelstra is probably a top 5 coach in the league. Well, not probably. He is a top 5 coach in the league, at least in my eyes. And so I have full confidence that Miami's going to have a great season. Pat Riley is never one to really accept losing in his organization, and so it's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on those 3 for sure. Toronto is definitely going to be one that I'm a little bit iffy on for a lot of reasons. But one team that you didn't mention that is a big one for me is the Milwaukee Bucks. As we continue to see Giannis develop and see how that team really starts to grow. They got a lot of really young, talented players in that organization that it's going to be interesting to see if they can get a little bit better in the next couple of years and if they can actually contend. And especially Giannis is really just an intriguing player. See how much of an impact he can ultimately make in the Eastern Conference, and if they can make a run in the playoffs next year, who knows, but in the future, definitely a team to watch out for.
Here's the one thing that I will say with the Bucks. They are currently in talks with Derrick Rose. And if the Bucks sign Derrick Rose and he doesn't come off the bench, I would stake my life on them not making the Eastern Conference Finals. I really would. I think that, like you said, Giannis is I think he's tied with Karl Anthony Towns right now as the most promising young player in the league. We saw what he could do last year. He was a force on every single facet on the court: blocks, steals, points, rebounds, assists. I think he led the Bucks in almost all 5 of the major categories last season. And if not, he was definitely close. They're really kind of rolling with him as the point forward, surrounding him with guys that can shoot and play off the ball, and kind of letting him bring the ball up in transition, initiating the half-court offense, stuff like that. I think if you add a guy like Derrick Rose, that just takes the ball out of the hands of your best playmaker. Giannis isn't really a guy that you want to run off the ball. He's not a fantastic shooter. His strength is penetrating and attacking the rim. So, but that being said, I think Giannis develops into a real MVP candidate this year. I think he's going to make a big splash, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Bucks nab the 4th seed.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, him leading the team in all, 4, 5 major categories is pretty incredible. Rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, and points per game. I mean, it's pretty insane what he's been able to do with Milwaukee. But I guess we'll head on into your first ever question for the 4 about the Eastern Conference.
All right, so my question really kind of ties into this idea of a dark horse. Now, this team is not a contender by any means to make the championship game or even the Eastern Conference Finals. But that being said, do the Brooklyn Nets have a shot at making the 8th seed?
Do the Brooklyn Nets have a chance of making the 8th seed? Now, going over the players they actually acquired in the offseason, that would include who specifically?
They added D'Angelo Russell.
We know about Russell, and they dropped Jared Allen out of Texas. Had some injury problems, didn't end up playing at all. I know for certain in the summer league, I was looking out for him, and he had a hip flexor issue, couldn't play.
They should have a healthy Jeremy Lin, and they didn't really have Jeremy Lin for that much of last season. He was really kind of hit or miss, dealt with a lot of injuries, but Brooklyn played really well as a team. When Lin was on the court, they certainly did not play like a 20-win team that they are. I think projections had them more as like a 35-win team when him and Brook Lopez were on the floor at the same time. Obviously, they lost Brook Lopez to the Lakers, picked up Mozgov and Trevor Booker in return. So they actually have a pretty solid backcourt when you look at D'Angelo Russell and Jeremy Lin. It's the front court that really kind of worries me here.
Yeah, they do pick up DeMar Carroll from Toronto, which is an interesting pickup for them. Adds a little bit of defensive ability for them. But again, some of the depth they got there, Rondé Hollis-Jefferson and some other players, a little bit uncertain. But that's not too bad of a pickup at Carroll.
Yeah, Carroll, he's been dealing with some injuries these past couple of years, too. He wasn't really producing like the Raptors wanted to, so they went ahead and dumped his contract to the Nets. I think Brooklyn got a first-round pick out of it. But, teams like Indiana, Chicago, Atlanta, all those playoff teams, they kind of really took a step back. I don't think the Magic are anywhere close to knocking on the door for a playoff spot. Same thing with the Knicks. So, those last 3 seeds in the East are kind of going to be a toss-up between Miami, Detroit, Charlotte, Philadelphia, and Brooklyn. Is it crazy to think that Brooklyn could beat out 2 of those teams to get one of those 3 spots?
I think it is crazy to think they could, because I just think that the Heat are pretty solid. I think they're kind of – and then Charlotte is solid as well, and I have pretty decent confidence that Detroit is probably the weakest out of those other 2, and so – they might, compete with Detroit, but I think Detroit could still probably nab the 8th spot. I don't know if Brooklyn has enough firepower to get there. I think Philadelphia will be a little bit better than Brooklyn as well. But in the coming years, it'll be interesting to see. They will need to make some more moves for certain. They're a couple drafts away from being, a legitimate team. Although in the East, that can be accelerated. I still think that they're a couple years away from being where they want to be.
Yeah, I actually really liked what Brooklyn did this offseason, though. Obviously the Celtics trade was a disaster for them, and they've been trying to recover ever since. But Sean Marks and that front office has really done a good job, I think, since he got hired. They're really kind of going with this mentality of, we're not good, we're not going to be good anytime soon, and we know that. For the last 3 seasons, they've owed their first-round picks to Boston. And that's not going to change this next season. I think Boston still has their pick. It's the last one that they gave them. So that being said, because they're such a bad young team, because they're such a bad team and they're so young, they don't they don't have a lot of money tied up in these guys. They have a ton of cap space. And so what they've been doing is they're overpaying for guys. They're bringing in some talent that will win them some games. Guys like, D'Angelo Russell and Jeremy Lin. And they're taking on bad contracts in exchange for first-round picks. Obviously, LA is looking to contend within the next couple of years and grabbing some big-name free agents. But with Mozgov's contract on the books, 4 years, $64 million, that was going to be tough. So Brooklyn says, hey, we'll take Mozgov's contract and we'll take that $64 million off the books for you, only if you give us a first-round pick in return. They did the same thing for DeMar Carroll and his big contract. Well, I think that's what they should do. I think that's what they're going to continue to do. They tossed max money at Otto Porter, which forced the Wizards to max, which is something they didn't really want to do. They did the same thing for KCP over in Detroit. And but the Lakers also obviously maxed KCP, $18 million a year for him. So I'm intrigued. I think that they have plenty of cap space for the next couple of years. They're not going to be good, but they can acquire some players in the draft finally after this next year. They have Toronto's first-round pick, LA's first-round pick. So it's going to be interesting. I think that they're a long shot to make the 8th seed. Obviously, Detroit got a little better than they did last year. Hopefully, Andre Drummond can kind of return to what he was 2 years ago. Charlotte adding Dwight Howard and Miami playing the way they did at the end of the season. It's a long shot, but I think Brooklyn could really surprise a couple people. I think D'Angelo Russell is going to take that next step into being a number one guy. I could see him averaging 23, 25 points a game. It's not like he's going to be having to give up the ball to any better players on that team. He's kind of going to be the guy on offense, and I think that bodes well for him. So I don't think they'll make the playoffs, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did as an 8th seed, looking at maybe 38, 37 wins.
Yeah, I mean, anything can happen in the East, to be honest with you. But I'm really excited. I want to see Russell and Jared Allen work together. I want to see how those two young players shine. I want to see those two guys shine, in all honesty. I want to see how those guys develop and if they can really turn into great players in the league, because I think that would be awesome to see.
Yeah, Mozgov, too. Mozgov is not as bad as people think. He was a key part of that Cleveland finals run in 2015, played some big minutes for them, and he's just been dealing with some nagging injuries since then. So, obviously, the Lakers kind of shut him down for half of the season last year. Given all that time to recover and all this summer, I think he's going to show out and kind of show what kind of player he really is, which I think he's going to be more of like a 10-8 kind of guy. So, and that's a good piece to have in your team. So,
yeah. For sure, it'll be interesting to see what Brooklyn does. But I think it'll take some time for them to develop. But we'll head on into my second question, and I try to really avoid discussing this player because we've already discussed him so much. But once LeBron James retires, does one team in the East really just take over and assert their dominance for years to come like LeBron has really done over the East? If so, who is that team? And if one team doesn't, if you don't think that one team will, what do you think the collection of teams will be that will contend on an annual basis? For the Western Conference, we've seen it's been basically Golden State and San Antonio for the most part, with a slight hint of Oklahoma City.
That's a good one. That's a kind of a tough one to predict. Obviously we don't know when LeBron's going to retire. It could be 2 years. It could be 10. And so that being said, let's say he retires in 4 years from now. In 4 years, okay. So I think the obvious choice here is going to be Philadelphia. As long as they keep their trio together and they kind of pan out the way that they're supposed to. Obviously, Fultz, great all-around guy. You have Simmons, a generational passer, and Embiid, who's probably the best big man prospect since a guy like Greg Oden. As long as they can stay healthy and stay together, I think they should have no problem kind of taking control of the East. That being said, there's some real contenders in there. John Wall, obviously, still young, just going to be hitting his prime right around that 4-year mark. He's definitely a guy that I can see putting a team on his back and carrying them to the finals, the conference finals. Same thing with Giannis and the Bucks. But the two that really stand out to me are going to be Philadelphia and obviously Boston. Boston has drafted really well. I think they're poised for the future. They still have a bunch of picks that they can use to acquire maybe another superstar or get some young talent in the draft to keep them relevant. Gordon Hayward has that 5-year deal. So he'll still be with the team then, presumably. You have guys like Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, Al Horford. Now, Al Horford and Isaiah Thomas are going to be a little old in 4 years, and I don't think they'll still be with the Celtics. But that being said, Danny Ainge is great at acquiring talent, whether it's through the draft or in free agency, as he showed with Horford, Thomas, and Gordon Hayward. So I don't think that Thomas really stays with Brooklyn for 4 more years. I think he's going to play 1 more year in Boston, and they're either going to let him walk or trade him. He's going to be commanding a max contract, and you really just don't want to be paying $25 million a year to a guy who's 35 years old, less than 6 feet tall, and relies on his athleticism for his game. I just don't see it happening. But, 4 years is plenty of time to pick up a point guard in the draft and develop him, or trade for one. Everybody's looking to move to the East, I think, or they will be within the next couple of years after LeBron retires, and it just is revealed how weak it really is. So I'm going to go with Philadelphia and Boston, with Washington and Milwaukee on deck.
Okay, yeah, makes sense for sure. And to be honest with you, LeBron's probably not going to retire until, it'll probably take him a little bit longer than 4 years to retire. But at that point, 4 years, it'll seem like he's probably, much less effective, and he won't really be a factor and may not even be in the Eastern Conference anymore. So I think that's probably why I went with that number there. But that's a fair assessment of the teams. I'm trying to think if there's really any other team that I would say in the future can contend. And I think that you pretty much hit it right on the head right there with Boston and Philadelphia as a teams. 4 years, in 4 years' time will be the most effective. Boston, because of their draft picks, they got some young talent. And Philadelphia obviously has already translated that, Joe's draft picks to players that have great potential and are already very young and are, potentially superstars in this league, if they stay healthy and they can just all work together, which is a lot to ask for, but we'll see what happens with them. But I think that's pretty much all the teams you can cover. I don't see Indiana or Chicago. Even Charlotte is tough to see. The Knicks, we know they won't. The Heat are interesting, but I feel like they're a little bit of a kind of a win now type team, but they're not going to be able. They don't have enough firepower to win now. But in terms of age, they are more win now. And Detroit is actually pretty young, in all honesty. But for some reason, Detroit doesn't seem like they have enough pieces to really score. I don't know what it is about them. Maybe I just feel like they need one. They just need 1 or 2 other superstar players, and I don't know if they can really build within the draft. So I would say the Sixers and Celtics probably makes a lot of sense right there.
Yeah, and one thing is LeBron may not retire in 4 years, but it's no secret that he is obviously going to be thinking about leaving Cleveland after next year. He did what he came to do. He brought a title to the land. I don't think anyone can fault him for maybe going to LA or somewhere in the Western Conference and teaming up with some of his friends for one last major title run, trying to compete with the Warriors. That's definitely a real thing. Jalen Rose came out and said that he thinks LeBron is as good as gone next year. Brian Windhorst saying that LeBron's given some serious consideration to it. He's not happy with Dan Gilbert. He's not happy with the Cavs front office, especially after they fired David Griffin. And so, in the now, Boston is definitely poised to make a run, as is, like I said, Washington. And, you touched on the Heat and how they look like a win-now team. And I agree, they look like a win-now team, but they have a lot of money tied up in guys that aren't necessarily win-now players,
Yeah.
Like I said, Spoelstra's a great coach, and I could see them making a run to the Eastern Conference Finals or maybe the second round, but I really don't see them having any chance in a series against the Warriors. They have $50 million tied up to Tyler Johnson, $50 million tied up to Kelly Olynyk. Goran Dragic is only getting older. Who's that rookie they have? He's not a rookie anymore, but that guy out of Duke. No, he's out of Duke. I'm blanking on his name right now. Justice Winslow, right. He hasn't exactly looked as polished as they hoped he would. His offensive game has been kind of absent. And, like we talked about earlier in the podcast, a couple podcasts back, Hassan Whiteside, while he's good right now, he's only getting older. And so I just don't see Miami being a real contender unless they can draw some big-name free agent, but they've been struggling with that lately. Whiffed on Gordon Hayward, whiffed on Kevin Durant. They haven't really been able to acquire a superstar since LeBron left. Obviously, losing Bosch to the blood clots and then Wade to Chicago. So, in my eyes, Miami's they're a dark horse playoff team for the Eastern Conference Finals, but they're not a contender, and they won't be for some time.
Yeah, their age group just isn't really at the point that it needs to be. But I guess we'll head on into your second question.
All right, so my second question looks at the Eastern Conference as a whole. I'm really interested to see how you think the playoff race plays out. If you were going to pick right now, if you were a betting man and you had to put money on, the seeds and who would land where, what are your top 8 playoff seeds in the East?
A top 8 playoff seeds in the East. I actually will go with 1 Boston. I'll go 2 Cleveland. Number 3, I'll roll with the Washington Wizards. 4, I'm going to roll with the Bucks. 5, I'll roll with the Raptors. 6 with the Heat. 7, the Hornets. And 8, the Sixers.
So you have Detroit leaving out of the playoff race.
Yes.
Okay.
Which is an interesting one because Detroit could very well make the playoffs, but I just sort of lack some confidence in Detroit. I don't know what it is.
I feel you on that. There's something about them that just... I want them to
do well, but I don't feel like they have a leader on their team.
Yeah, Reggie Jackson has kind of shown that he's not really... I'm with you. It's something about him. Something just puts me off him. I love Stan Van Gundy as a coach, but I'm not a fan of Drummond. I don't think Reggie Jackson is, a star point guard in this league. I think he's a serviceable starter. But I'm looking at that roster, and I just don't really see anything that can really make some noise in the playoffs. Obviously, they added Luke Kennard, but he's a rookie. He's not going to make a huge impact in his first year. And they just don't really have that go-to guy that I think they need to succeed in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But other than that, our lists pretty much match up. I had, Boston going number 1. I think they improved drastically. While
I also think Cleveland will rest LeBron more this year, so I don't think they'll win as many games. And they're never really a great regular season team. So I mean, they're very good, obviously, but they're relatively close to even being a 3 seed this season. So. I can see them being a 2 seed.
Sure. I was about to say exactly that. LeBron's only getting older. They're going to be cautious with his minutes. They've never really
I think he played like the most minutes per game last year. I think he averaged the most.
Yeah, and I don't see that trend continuing. That was a big storyline, and Tyronn Lue took a lot of flack for it. I think he's going to be more careful and kind of rest his guys. Especially, there was all this talk about, Cleveland, resting LeBron. They don't look good. Their defense looks terrible. And then they just blew through the entire playoffs. So, I think they're going to rest him. I think they know that he just really has a different switch that he can flip in the regular season. But you're right. They're dangerously close to being a 3 seed. They were actually tied in the standings with Toronto this year, both at 51 wins. And Cleveland had the tiebreaker there. So I'm going to go Boston number 1, Cleveland number 2. I also had the Wizards at 3 just because I think that Toronto kind of took a step back. I had Toronto at 4, Bucks at 5. You had that kind of reversed. 6, I think, is going to be the Heat. I can see the Hornets grabbing that 7th seed, like you said, and I like Philadelphia at 8. So I agree with your list there.
Yeah, I think it's pretty solid. I think that we're both probably going to be decently close. I mean, hopefully, obviously, to what the actual standings will be.
Right. So do you think who do you think is going to be the worst team in the East? This isn't one of my questions, just kind of an add on there.
I'm gonna go with the. God, it does depend somewhat on how the Carmelo issue works itself out in the Knicks. Man. I'm gonna go with the Knicks, to be honest with you. I would go with the Magic, but I feel like the Knicks, I think the Nets will improve. I think they'll still be bad, but I think that the Knicks will just be very poor. It's in ways I feel like it sometimes starts with the head coach. I don't think they have a head coach that is on the right track for them. I don't know if – I think sometimes when you have a team that's so kind of on the down, low, and they're just not really rising right now, I think sometimes you need a coach that can get you back to fundamentals, get you back to basics. And I don't know, they still have Hornacek at the helm, correct?
Yeah.
I don't think he's that guy for them. So I think that hurts them a lot. And then obviously if you lose out on Carmelo, and they don't seem like they have a lot of pieces they can work with. Rose is he wasn't even helping them when he was there. They have to deal with the Noah contract. Porzingis is obviously a great player, but what help does he have? And to me, they seem like they could be pretty poor next year.
Yeah, if they go ahead and trade Carmelo, I can see them being the worst team in the East. But right now, I think my pick is going to be the Bulls. I look at that roster, and I don't see it at all. I mean, we talked about it. Robin Lopez is probably either Robin Lopez, Dwayne Wade, or Zach LaVine is going to be their best player. And while I love Zach LaVine, he's just so young, and I don't think you're going to win anything with him as your best player. I think he's a great third option, just like he was in Minnesota, and I think he would have kind of evolved into one of the best third options in the league, kind of like a Klay Thompson role. But now that he's kind of going to be the number one guy with D Wade and Robin Lopez over in Chicago, I just don't see it. I would be surprised if the Bulls had 35 wins.
Yeah, it's gonna be a rough year for Chicago, I would assume as well. So that's not too far fetched. But I guess we'll get on into my third question, which is the one that actually ties into a historical comparison of the Eastern Conference and a certain team that I'm interested in what your thoughts are on it. And it's, what would you take the 2003-2004 Detroit Pistons squad over the 2016/the present Cleveland Cavaliers?
Now, the 2003-2004 squad was the ones that they were just coming off a title, correct?
It was the year they won the title with Billups, Rip Hamilton, Tayshaun Prince, Rasheed Wallace, Ben Wallace.
Wow. Okay.
And it's interesting because, LeBron actually gave him fits even at that point in his career, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Even when he was so young. I mean, that's essentially the Pistons team that he scored the last 25 points of the.
Yep.
Right. That's pretty much them.
And now he has a better team, so it would be interesting, I think.
LeBron just plays so well in the playoffs that I really want to say Cleveland. I think that the Cavs would struggle. I don't think it would be a sweep at all, like they've done with the rest of the Eastern Conference. But while the Pistons defense is just so great, they just don't really have the offense to me to keep up with Cleveland. I mean, the Golden State had such a fantastic defense last year, as they always do, or as they have in this kind of dynasty run that they've made. And Cleveland scored about 115 points a game on them. Obviously, they still lost in 5. But that just goes to show you how talented Cleveland can be, especially from an offensive standpoint. They just so many good shooters on the team. Obviously, you have LeBron. Kyrie's a guy that when he's hot, it doesn't matter how good your defense is. And I just don't see Detroit really having the offensive firepower to keep up with Cleveland over the course of a 7-game series. I think they could steal a game or two at home and push it to 6. And, if Chauncey Billups has a great game, Rip Hamilton gets hot from beyond the arc, they could even push it to 7. But then you have to deal with a Game 7 LeBron, and that's a beast no one wants to face. So I'm gonna go with Cleveland, but it's a lot closer than people would think.
Yeah, it is interesting because when they ended up, it just gets closer and closer, the gap between the two teams as you see them kind of progress and get a little bit older. That 2003-2004 team was obviously very good. They didn't end up playing the Cavs in the playoffs, but once you hit the 06, 2007 team, they get a little bit older, and it's like, 3 or 4 years later. So it'd be interesting to see if they were a little bit younger, if that would have played any impact on their potential success, because you no longer have that Ben Wallace as a defensive anchor in that 2006-2007 team that ended up losing to the Cleveland Cavaliers in 6 games, I believe, in the Eastern Conference Finals. So that's one thing you have to take into account when you consider what the team would be like. That'd be interesting to see a prime Ben Wallace, guarding the paint against LeBron James. That would be a sight to see.
That would be impressive. I think that Ben Wallace would be good. He would kind of take the task of kind of helping shut down Kevin Love. And I just don't.
I think it'd just be interesting to see how they try and stop LeBron inside the paint, because that's a team that obviously defensively is so strong all around that you have Tayshaun obviously guarding LeBron, but if he gets past him, can Ben Wallace be a great shot blocker that can stop him? Because we haven't really seen a shot blocker with a defense like the Pistons go up against LeBron. In all honesty, that's just not something that occurs in the modern day too frequently. So that would be interesting to watch.
Yeah, it really would be. Do you think that the Pistons would do the Jordan rules 2.0, the LeBron rules?
I would love for them to do that.
Just beat the
Nobody
crap.
seems to be able to do that. I don't know if you can do that though, because Jordan was a little bit weaker at that point, and he got stronger and was able to withstand the power. And LeBron's already 6'8", 250, 260, so that'd be a tough task. But maybe if they're up to the challenge.
Yeah, that'd be fun to watch. Although I'm interested to see someone try to check LeBron when he comes in the paint.
Yeah,
how big?
That's true.
How big do you have to be to do that?
Yeah, and Ben Wallace was about the exact same height as LeBron, but he had some pretty massive shoulders and a big body, frame. So that would be interesting to see for certain. But definitely a hypothetical situation that is really tough to analyze given their time apart and the different eras they played in. But fun one to think about nonetheless. So we'll head on into your third question for the Eastern Conference teams.
All right, so this question kind of focuses on, I think, probably the most exciting young trio in the league. And I'm really excited to watch these guys play together this year. I think it's all finally going to come together, and Philadelphia fans are going to finally get a reprieve from this constant losing for the past 4 or 5 seasons. Assuming the big three of Embiid, Fultz, and Simmons can stay healthy, how high do you see them taking Philadelphia? What's their ceiling? Can they win titles? Can they win multiple titles? Or do you think they're going to top out at second round Eastern Conference Finals?
To me, right now, with the team they have, they kind of remind me of a very, if they can stay healthy and if they can kind of put it together, and then we see them emerge as a team that can contend and be in the playoffs. I think that their ceiling is probably close to that of the 2012 Oklahoma City Thunder roster. A very young unit that was extraordinarily talented and ended up making the finals only to lose to a more experienced team in the Miami Heat and in the opposing conference, except this time they'll be the young ones in the East as opposed to the West. So I think that it just depends how long they can stay with each other. It's very hard to see into the future because I think for the Thunder, the issue was definitely the youth and somewhat of a lack of a leadership position. I feel like nobody really was a true leader for Oklahoma City at that point. There were guys that, I'm sure that, they had good communicators with Oklahoma City, but they weren't really having anybody stand up and be kind of a leader for their team and kind of, set an example for them. So it could take some time for them to actually develop into a winning team. I don't know if Ben Simmons or Fultz or Embiid has that, frame of mind. I don't know if I see them having that. So that's kind of why I don't know if they can. I don't know. I think it's hard to tell. But I don't see them. I think their ceiling is to make the finals, but to lose ultimately. I think that's what their ceiling is.
That's fair. I'm really high on both Simmons and Embiid. From what I saw from Embiid, he just looks like this he looks like a hybrid to me between, the old generation of back to the basket, post monster centers, that just had crazy footwork. They were freakishly strong, blocking shots at the rim, then getting down the other court and throwing down, slams from the block. But then he's got a little bit of new dog in him. He can step out to the perimeter and shoot the three. He's not afraid to put the ball on the floor and drive into the paint. And I think that he is really this kind of next generation of centers, him and Karl Anthony Towns, guys that have that skill and footwork in the post, but can also step out and shoot jumpers and spread the defense. I think that's the way the league is going, and I think Embiid is probably the best at it, as long as he can stay healthy. Simmons, I think that he looks like a better passer than LeBron did at his age, which is really, really saying something. Obviously, his offensive scoring troubles are something to be a little concerned about, if he can develop a jump shot or not. And then, Fultz is just one of those guys that you just know is going to be a star. How much of a star, how big he can get is really the question. But there's no question that Fultz is probably going to make an all-star game or several in his career. Can they put it all together, though? And that's the question. And I don't know. I think that if the pieces fall right and, they don't face a super tough team from the Western Conference, I think they could win a title. If Embiid turns into the monster that he looks like he's going to be, he definitely seems like the guy that can carry a team to a title, especially with guys like Fultz and Simmons backing him up. But, if this whole super team trend continues, with guys teaming up in the West, teams like Golden State, Houston, OKC looks like they're primed to be good for a little while. Obviously, the Spurs are always a threat with Kawhi. I think Kawhi's going to win a championship at some point. It's going to be tough.
Another one, you mean?
Yeah, another one. I meant as the number one guy.
Man.
Yeah.
Although he was Finals MVP.
He was Finals MVP, but I think Duncan was still kind of the guy for them. But yeah, it's really interesting to see Philly. I think they top out at 1 or 2 titles at the most, at the absolute best case scenario.
Yeah.
If they
it's very tough to predict the future for a team like this because they're so young and health hinges on a lot of their future potential success. It more so than maybe any other young team we've seen because they've already showcased that they have a little bit of an inability to stay on the court for long periods of time. So it is going to be interesting for sure. That's why I have a lot of hesitancy about putting them in a position where they can win multiple titles in the future. I just have to see them play a full year before I get some confidence in them. But they definitely have the talent to do it. I would like to see one guy emerge as leader. And Embiid is actually a guy, you talk about a guy who can lead a team to a finals victory. He does seem like the type of player who can put the team on his back and really be a problem for other opposing teams and carry his team to a championship. But it all will depend on, obviously, their health and how they develop in the future.
Right. So, yeah, I think my final answer is going to be, best case scenario, 2 titles. Realistically, 1, maybe 2 finals appearances and a loss. And then the rest of them, making the Eastern Conference Finals and losing to maybe Boston or, Miami or whoever down the road. So
I think they could be like the New Jersey Nets of the early 2000s and making I think they made 2 Eastern Conference Finals or 2 finals in a row, only to lose by a lot to the Spurs and the Lakers, if I'm not mistaken. So That's what I think for them. But we head on into the final question for me, I believe, right?
Right.
Yeah, final question for me, and this is a team we actually haven't touched on, and I want to send you a little bit back in time to the 2008-2009 season, and it's a little team in Florida called the Orlando Magic who ended up making it all the way to the NBA Finals, only to lose in 5 games to Kobe Bryant and the LA Lakers. Based on that season, what do you think the future holds for Orlando, seeing how so much has really changed after we kind of thought that Dwight Howard was the man of the future, going to the finals and leading them at age 23, being, another great player. I think he ended up winning one of his Defensive Player of the Year trophies that season. The roster has obviously changed just so much for them. Even Ty Lue was on the squad, for God's sakes. But now with what they got going in Jonathan Isaac, they signed Jonathan Simmons from the Spurs. I think Vucevic is still there, correct?
Yeah, he's still there.
So, what do you think the future holds for Orlando? And, they've had such heartbreak with the 93, I believe, or 94 season and losing that finals. Or was it 95? Might have been 95. And now 2009. So, what do you think the future holds for Orlando?
Yeah, Orlando's really had some bad luck with losing generational big men. Losing Shaq, losing Dwight Howard, both to the Lakers, actually.
Yeah. But I'm losing Tracy McGrady as well later on, although he gave him a lot of his prime.
Gosh, I look at Orlando's roster and I just don't know what it is. I don't see a direction for them. I don't see a plan. Even with a team like Brooklyn, you can at least see the plan. Take on bad contract, get young picks, acquire talent via the draft, and cultivate that and grow. I don't see it with Orlando. They won 29 games last year. They signed Jonathan Isaac, so it looks like they're poised to win maybe 31, 33 this year, which is not going to get them a super high pick in the draft unless there's, by some stroke of luck, they get the number one pick like Cleveland did in 2013 when they picked Anthony Bennett?
Yeah, I think it was, yeah.
So, they have a lot of guys on the roster that would be serviceable role players, but they don't have any stars. I think Vucevic would be a perfect guy to fit on the Celtics. He's an underrated rebounder, doesn't demand a ball a lot on offense, so he lets the perimeter guys do his thing, but he's not really a star. Aaron Gordon is, flashy, but they've been playing him out of position pretty much his entire career. I don't know if he's a 3 or a 4 at this point for them, and I definitely don't see him making an all-star game anytime soon. Elfrid Payton, he's a guy who reminds me a lot of Rajon Rondo in the fact that he is an all-around game. He can get those triple-doubles for him, but he doesn't really have a jump shot. Doesn't look like he's really going to be a guy that you want starting for your team if they were ever to make the playoffs. Obviously they got Jonathan Isaac, which was a solid pickup for them. I just don't see it. I think they're kind of stuck in that purgatory where they're a bad team, but they're not the worst team. And they're certainly not a good team. And so unless they get lucky in the draft or, by some miracle sign a big free agent to a middling roster by throwing some max money at him, I just don't see the plan for them. I'm not impressed. I'm not impressed with the job that front office has done. Frank Vogel, the head coach, is doing the best with what he's got, but he doesn't really have much. I think they could be in contention with the Bulls for being one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference. I just don't see it for them. What are they doing? What do you see a plan for them? Do you see any type of strategy?
For me, I agree. I don't know if there is a sense of direction here, but I actually do like what they did in the offseason. They draft Jonathan Isaac out of Florida State. They signed Jonathan Simmons, who I was pretty high on out of San Antonio. So they're getting some players in. They got so many young players that, again, they're very confusing players that haven't really established themselves. Aaron Gordon, Elfrid Payton, even, Vucevic to extent is in some way, shape, or form kind of off, what he should be really. Terrence Ross, kind of an inconsistent guy. A lot of guys who haven't shown a lot of consistency, so that's a huge concern. Mario Hezonja, very young as well, and Fournier. So they got a really odd type situation working on. Biyombo is a guy that hasn't worked out for them thus far. So I agree. It is very weird the direction they're going in right now. But I want to see if they can get another type Dwight Howard guy to be the star guy. I want a Jonathan Isaac to rise up and be that man for Orlando. Some guy that they can rally around because they don't have a player like that. And sometimes you need that. I don't know if maybe that's the issue. Maybe Vucevic really isn't a number one guy. Maybe he needs to be a number two guy. Maybe they need somebody else to stand up. And I don't know if clearly, as of right now, Aaron Gordon isn't that. So they need a guy, I think, to stand up. And I don't know if Isaac is that man, and he might not be, but they need a centerpiece. And that's when they were so good with Orlando. They had a guy they rallied around in Dwight Howard, and they showed that they can have contributing role players who could be effective around that player in Dwight Howard and start to win games. So they need to start somewhere. I like what they did with Jonathan Isaac, to be honest with you, and I really want to see him thrive in Orlando as well.
Yeah, Simmons was a good pickup at his price. I think that he gets a little bit overrated because of that playoff series against Houston. He didn't really shoot the ball well. He had a big game against against Golden State in that first game of the season, obviously. But he got really inconsistent minutes from Pop. His offensive game is kind of iffy. Obviously, he's a great defender. He's really aggressive on that end. He's a real ball hound. But I think he helps the Magic. But like we said, it's only a 3-year deal. And they're not going to be anywhere close to contending in 3 years. It's a solid pickup for the time. But I don't know how much it's going to impact their future. One guy I forgot to mention is going to be Evan Fournier. Now, he's a guy that I do like. He's a pure scorer. And I was really impressed with what he was able to do last year, especially with the pieces around him, 17 points a game. I think if they can, make him the focal point of the offense, have Vucevic number 2, maybe bring Jonathan Isaac in as 3, as a third option there with Aaron Gordon, I could see it. They're kind of hamstrung by the cap a little bit. They have a lot of money owed to guys like Bismack Biyombo, Terrence Ross, Elfrid Payton, guys like that. So I think that they have to go ahead and they need to be bad. I think they just need to accept that they're bad, and they need to stay bad, and they need to get some more guys like Isaac, young guys that can make an impact in the future. Because right now what they're doing just is not going to work out for them, I don't think. I don't see any... I think they just need to be bad. They just need to accept the fact that they're going to suck. Their fans need to suck it up and just, enjoy the young talent. Gordon, well, he might not make an all-star game. He's a pretty fun guy to watch. He's got hops. And, Jonathan Simmons also has that ability to really kind of electrify a crowd. And then, once you get some talent in the draft and you're able to get rid of some of these bad contracts, whether they expire or you trade them or whatever, then you kind of swing for the fences and get a guy that you can build around, a free agent, and kind of sell him on the culture that you're trying to build. But right now, it doesn't look like they're doing that. It looks like they're content with being middle of the pack, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the worst place they can be.
It's a very difficult situation because it is tough, in my opinion, to see how teams can rise up out of nowhere. And not saying Orlando will, but it almost feels like they can only tank for so long. They've been bad for 6 or 7 years, and they've really seemed to whiff on some draft picks. And now at this point, I think they got to deal with what they have. I think they need to try and deal with Aaron Gordon and him being maybe not up to the expectations that he has set forth for him. I think they need to try and develop Hazonia. They just need to kind of work with what they got. And, you never know what's going to happen. They got a lot of athletic players. They need to bring some type of excitement to Orlando. They've been bad for 6 or 7 years, and I don't know, man. I don't know if they need a tank, but I mean, obviously, logically, it makes a lot of sense for them to do that based on the success they've had, but there's only so many years you can tank. I mean, it feels like they've been bad for a while, and they've really just not been able to capitalize on some of their draft picks. So I don't know if they need just a completely revamped front office or what, but I want to see some of these young guys just go out there and have fun and play basketball. But it seems like Orlando struggles to do that a lot of times.
Yeah, honestly, if I was a GM of the Magic, I would be shopping Vucevic as hard as I could to the Celtics. Get some of those assets back, You're going to have a high draft pick this year because you're bad. So why not get one of the Celtics draft picks that they have so many of? Maybe get a young guy, someone like, I don't know, Terry Rozier, or, just a young guy that Boston has. Start developing your young guys, get some draft picks, and build through the draft. I think that's the direction. That they're going to be on, like, naturally, just because they're so bad.
Yeah.
But it's tough. You're right. They've been bad for so long, and it really sucks for the fans. But, I mean, I guess...
Seems like there's no other option, though, yeah.
Yeah, I don't see any other way for them to go.
Yeah.
Do you watch... Speaking of Mario Hezonja, do you watch Game of Zones? Have you seen those?
No, I have not.
You haven't seen Game of Zones?
No.
Oh my God, it's so funny. But there's an episode where Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan go to House Magic, right? And they're trying to trade Serge Ibaka, which they ended up doing. And they in the show they traded Mario Hezonja for a horse. So that just kind of shows you how disappointing he's been. Obviously, There's always room for improvement, and hopefully he can take that next step. And be the guy that they thought he would be when they drafted him in the lottery 2 years ago. But so far, he hasn't shown it. So,
yeah, so Orlando definitely in the future is looking a little bit bleak for probably a lot of analysts. But I think that wraps up both our questions. Is there anything else you want to add to our Eastern Conference topic for day one? We're going to go to the Western Conference tomorrow, by the way.
I think I got one more question.
Yeah, all right.
One more question left. And that's going to be... So with everything that's happened in the offseason, with Boston adding who they've added, and Cleveland not really making any moves, losing their GM, and really not adding anyone, do the Cavs have a legit shot at getting knocked off by the Celtics, especially if Boston can deal for a guy like Vucevic who solves their rebounding issues and also gives them some help on the inside?
You're talking about this season?
Yeah, this season. Could this be the year?
Man, it is really tough to see because of what LeBron has done consistently. He seems like he never fails to be able to make it out of the East for so long. And it's tough to just all of a sudden think that a team like Boston can stop them. But I don't know. I don't know if I've seen enough of Vucevic's game to really see if they could. But if he can provide some rebounding, which they desperately need, and maybe a little bit of rim protection, I could absolutely see Boston taking it to 6 or 7 games with Cleveland. Do they beat the Cavaliers in the Eastern Conference Finals, though, with the addition of Gordon Hayward, Jayson Tatum? He's got some players, Isaiah Thomas, Marcus Smart, Al Horford. Wow. I don't see it happening personally. I don't see it happening this year. I think next year would be a better year for them. I think it's really tough, as some teams have shown Durant made it look easy, for players to enter even just into a contending team and win a title. And not only win a title, but just make it to the finals. Even LeBron in 2011, it was tough for him to do that, and he was as good as he was. I don't see it happening personally, but the way I could see it happening is if somebody on Cleveland gets hurt, which is very possible, like a LeBron, like a Kyrie, like a Kevin Love. So that could happen. But other than that, I don't see it happening personally. But I can see if they get a big man, why you could be convinced that they could make the jump over the Cavaliers to the NBA Finals.
Yeah, there's a couple things here that really concern me about Boston. One, I think if they take it to 7 games, they lose every time.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's any way. I mean, I guess we're assuming here that Boston has the 1 seed.
Yes, yeah.
So they would have home court advantage. For whatever reason, LeBron just absolutely hates the Celtics, and he demolishes them in every way in the playoffs ever since that
2009-2010, I believe. Right.
Yeah, that series that made him leave Cleveland the first time.
Mm-hmm.
But how ironic would it be if losing to Cleveland made him leave, or losing to Boston made him leave Cleveland the first time, and losing to Boston this year makes him leave again?
That would be incredibly ironic.
But I think that if they take it to 7 games, LeBron's never lost a Game 7 as far as I'm concerned. And I'm pretty sure he averages like 32 points a game in Game 7s. So I don't see him in any way them losing to the Celtics in 7 games. That being said, it was a sweep, or it was a gentleman's sweep, 5 games for Cleveland. So I don't know if Hayward and Vucevic, if they get him, or a guy like him, is enough to have a 4-game swing. That being said, I think that it's going to be closer than people think. LeBron's only getting older, and eventually his game is going to drop off. I know it doesn't seem like it, and I know I'm kind of crossing sports here, but look at what happened to Peyton Manning. 1 year he's throwing for 5,500 yards, breaking the yardage record, 55 touchdowns, generally having the best season of his career, and 2 seasons later he's getting benched for Brock Osweiler. Now obviously he came back in the playoffs and won a Super Bowl, but he was a shell of the player that he was. So things happen quick, especially when it comes to age and injuries. So I think it's going to be closer than it seems. Boston added some good pieces. Cleveland really kind of stayed pat, which I was disappointed by. And it's going to be interesting. I think that 6 games is where it's going to end. If I had to really bet on it, I'd say Cleveland in 6. But if anyone has a shot to do it, it's Boston. And if it's going to be any year out of the last 7, I think this is the one. So,
yeah, I agree. It's possible, but
unlikely.
I don't know. It's so tough to see the future. You never know what's going to happen with LeBron. It just hinges so much on him, I feel like, with Cleveland. You never know how healthy he'll be, if he'll still be at the same level he's been at for years, and how Gordon Hayward really adapts and makes an impact for Boston. So it's tough to see. I don't see it happening, but I can see why, if they get a big man, why people will see it happening, like I mentioned earlier.
Another interesting fact, Gordon Hayward's never lost a home game to LeBron James.
Really?
Really.
That is crazy. Yeah, Utah has had some success against Cleveland over the past couple of years, so that does make some sense.
But yeah, that about wraps it up for my 4 questions. I think we got the Western Conference coming up tomorrow, yeah?
Yeah, yes, Western Conference coming up tomorrow.
4 questions each. That'll be a good one. You have anything else you want to add? Any other quick questions about anything that's happening today?
I don't think so. I think we covered most of what I wanted to cover with the Eastern Conference as a whole. I think we basically covered the entire landscape, to be honest with you. Almost every team. We didn't go into huge in-depth analysis about really the Knicks, the Hornets, the Pacers, and the Hawks, but as a lot of those teams don't have a lot of crazy chance, and I think that it was fine for not covering them too much. But I think we basically covered it all, and that's a lot of what I wanted to look at with the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, still, there's still being reports out today that Melo is looking for the Houston trade, which it's just like, pull the trigger already, you know? It's driving me crazy sitting here just wondering what's going to happen. What's the point of having him in New York still? Like, I don't get it. He's not going to, all he's going to do is get you a worse draft pick.
It's a weird dynamic with the Knicks right now. I'm not certain what they're trying to do. It almost feels like they know they can't. They know that there's nothing out there that they want or they can get, so they don't know what to do. Like, it's like nobody wants to, like they don't have any pieces out there that they want, but they also want to get rid of Carmelo simultaneously, so they're kind of at an impasse.
Yeah, it's the weirdest thing. It's like, we can tell that they so obviously want to get rid of him, and yet I've never seen, like, can you remember the last time a team, like, publicly humiliated its star player and hurt his trade value so much than the Knicks have done with Carmelo?
It's been a minute, I think, since I've seen the team do that.
Like, all the Phil Jackson's, snide comments and press conferences, and then eventually just coming out and saying he wants Melo to waive his no-trade clause. Doing stuff like that, it's just going to tank Melo's value. Who's going to give you a good offer for Melo when they know that you're desperate to give him away anyways? I just don't understand what the Knicks are doing.
Yeah, the Knicks are quite a weird situation in general. I don't know what to make of them, to be honest with you. It sucks because Carmelo can still play, but it doesn't seem like the Knicks are the place for him anymore. They don't seem like he doesn't seem like he's wanted.
Yeah, I think, honestly, we were talking about earlier, I think Melo would be a great fit on the Pistons.
Oh, absolutely. They need offense in an instant, and he can be a number one man for them, but the affiliation with Detroit is probably not there.
Yeah.
I don't know what his connections are there, but he would have to have some, I think, to actually go there. But that would be perfect for him, and just a perfect world for Detroit. I mean, offensive guy that can be the main man and can make a bucket when they need one, because they're going to need people to make buckets, and he's the definition of that. So that would be perfect for him.
Yeah, I don't see it happening. I don't think that Detroit really has any pieces that they can get back.
Yeah, they can't. But it would be fun to think about.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it. Unless, like I said, you got anything else to add?
No, I think that's about it. I think that Western Conference coming up tomorrow should be pretty exciting, to be honest with you. Got a lot of storylines in the Western Conference, and a lot of impressive rookies also in the West, as we covered yesterday.
Yeah. As always, check the YouTube description for links to our website, Twitter, and all of that. I should have an article coming out this week talking about some rookies in the league, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But I think that's it from us. So unless you got anything else to add, this will be us signing off.
Yep, it's all good.
All right.